This is the internet court of truth and lies. Its purpose is if you have something that you believe is the truth in the media, or you believe it's a lie in the media, then you can bring your case that it's the truth or it's a lie to up to 8 jurors and see what they think about your opinion about whether or not something is the truth or a lie. The way we do this is we've got a standard set of 8 questions that are called verdict questions that can be answered for any truth or lie. The purpose of the questions are never perfect for whatever you're claiming. They will never be. It's not possible to have a standard set of 8 questions that are always perfect. But the purpose of the 8 questions is to keep the dialogue open between people at the trial on focusing on the question at hand. It's called enforced moderated dialogue, which is just a means by which people can have a more civilized discussion about things and actually learn from each other. The value of this is that the trials, as we've run them over the years now, have this wonderful property that people find out how other people are thinking. The plaintiff often finds out something or some way of thinking about something that hadn't thought of before, and the jurors often find out the same sorts of things. These things tend to be interesting to watch and also to participate in. The trial today, I'm the plaintiff. This is a trial about something that a lot of people, I think, have not really thought of, but it comes out of some findings in something called computational linguistics or structural linguistics from the 1950s by a guy named Noam Chomsky, who basically said if he looks at any sort of natural language that humans can speak, there is not a finite number of sentences you can utter. The number of things that people can talk about is basically infinite. Now, infinity here is a funny word, but it's infinite. It's not, doesn't have any practical limits. As a consequence, there's no way you can categorize what people can talk about. A classic example where attempts have been made to do that are these things called encyclopedias, where all of man's knowledge is supposed to have been put into these, like Encyclopedia Britannica. But it's long since been recognized that these encyclopedias are incomplete. So there are things that you can talk about that just don't appear in the encyclopedias. That fits Chomsky's original observation. So one of the things that comes out of this area that I've been doing stuff on is in Mendaciology, which is the computational cognitive neuroscience of lies and deceit, is that lies and deceit work the same way as truthful expressions. Namely, there is no limit. There is no limit. Anybody who says that they can characterize the types of lies that people can say, it's like a person pretending that they can write an encyclopedia that can encompass all of man's knowledge. You just can't do it. Natural language is that way. There's an interesting parallel in human natural languages to something called the molecular folding problem in forming proteins which constitute the molecules that give you life, which give any animal or vegetable life. These proteins are strings of atoms or molecules. Technically speaking, can have as many as 300 trillion possible ways to fold, but they only fold in 1 or 2 or 3 ways, and they do it very quickly. The problem that these people study, we still can't explain how folding of molecules takes place in life, because we see all these possibilities, but they fold in only certain ways, and we don't know why they fold in certain ways. When they fold up, the shape of the molecule constitutes how it operates. We have the same problem in natural language. We know that any human natural language, you can describe anything that a human can experience or think about. We know that. Chomsky proposed some basic structural constraints on that have held true over the years. But we don't know why that's true. We don't know what constitutes a sort of a complete human natural language, but we do know such things exist because you can have many different languages. And even though one language may not have the same technical concepts, some specialized words, all languages have enough words put together that you can translate from one language to another. Even if the translation isn't perfect, you can always do it, and the translators do this real time. So we actually don't know what constitutes a complete natural language. Similarly, lies appear to operate exactly the same way. There is not a finite number of lies that you can tell. It's an infinite number. There's not a finite encyclopedia of all the possible lies you could tell. It's just not possible. The science says the answer is just like there's no limit to the number of truthful expressions that are possible. There's no limit to the number of lies that are possible. And that's a major thing to say. The current computational cognitive neuroscience, there's a reason for that. And the reason is very strange. It comes from this thing called perceptron theory, which basically says that natural language is just a window on neural computation. And all neural computation operates the same way that natural language operates. So if you look at the primitive units of computation for all neural computation, we say it's like perceptron, which has some number of inputs, and a typical neuron, for example, has about 3,000 connections to other neurons. So you can have 3,000 inputs, and then it has an output, which can be a value, which is could be the sum of the weighted inputs, where the weights of on the inputs are the memory that's being recognized, perceived. The output is the proposition itself, the whole proposition. So some subset of those inputs have to do with the subject, and then some other subset have to do with the predication that's being made of the subject, or the context in which the subject is being perceived. The proposition is the subject predicate proposition that's being made. Okay. The argument in perceptron theory and modern cognitive neuroscience is that is not language. Language is a mirror, as a window on that process. But all the rest of the brain that's computing, and all the other neural systems that are computing inside your many brains inside your head, are performing the same operations. That's the reason that one part of your eyes can tell your frontal cortex, your reasoning process, what you're seeing, because the communication is in the same language, and it's all in the same language that we see manifest in how natural language works. Oddly, Chomsky made the same argument in 1955. He called it deep structure and surface structure, and the deep structure had this propositional nature to it, subjects and predicates. So in making that assumption, we can deduce that since all natural language can be truths, can be deceits, that the brain can compute truths and deceits anywhere in it. That's a natural phenomenon associated with propositionalizing about events. So you can self-deceive yourself in many different ways. There's no limit to them. And that's what this argument is. If we make this assumption that all neural systems compute this way, then natural language just falls out. But it's like the folding problem. We don't fully understand why there are universal words in all languages. All languages have certain words that are universal. For example, in all human natural languages, there's a word for nose. Now, you could say, I know why. There are a lot of words like that. There are a lot of words that are universal for which you can't just say this, that explains everything because that's only face. The problem is where are all these words come from? And they come out of the system. They don't come out of any other place. And we believe that we see in our modern AI systems, LLMs, that once they train up, they can speak in natural language, and they appear to be able to speak completely in natural language. So I had Grok just to see what it said, and it's not up to date, and Grok is not always right. But it says, no, not all animals can deceive. And deception is widespread in the animal kingdom, but far from universal. And what they go around and do is they want proof. Their assumption is that animals can't deceive. And so what they say is that they're like worms, for example, they deceive, but we don't know that they deceive. Of course, worms can't talk to you. They can't convince you that they can deceive things. So can they be deceived? Yes. The answer they give is they say not all animals can, extremely simple organisms can't. We don't really know that. Passive filter feeders may not in active ways that favor deception by somebody's definition, by the way. We would argue that no, their brains, to the extent that they have brains, are propositional and deal with subjects and predicates. The subject is when a dog, for example, is the dog knows that it's you that's talking, not a stranger. That's the subject that's talking, not a stranger that's talking. So dogs keep track of propositions. They're propositionally thinking, even though they can't talk or say a word in English.
Dogs also deceive.
And dogs deceive.
I had a border collie who would fake a limp if it didn't want to go out. And I came across that, and I discovered this is actually common behavior among lots of dogs. Owners will report that they fake. So yeah, animals at the higher cognitive level.
Well, my argument is they all do it. You're just unwilling to believe it. They're not as smart as we are. The argument that's being made here is that there is no limit to the number of types of lies, and all animals can lie and be lied to, be deceived, and recognize that they had been deceived.
All animals can lie, but I'm not sure that's an argument for saying lies are unlimited. I don't see how those two relate.
So the argument is that the reason is that the neural computation fundamentally gives you that. That's what predication does. But figuring out, again, it's the failure to have an encyclopedia. The theory would be if deception were somehow separated from language, from the fundamental computation of neural systems, then we should be able to see a limit to the possible deception, see some kind of a limit. You can't lie about blank. No, you can lie about anything. If you assume that language is a window on all computation, we do know this. We do know that there are some fMRI and EEG studies on looking at where computation is when people are deceiving each other or lying. It turns out it's all over the brain. It's not in the speech area. It's all over the brain. That's what we would expect. That's my argument. I'm going to first go over my verdicts. I said it's true that there's no limit to the number and kinds of lies possible in any living animal brain. That's the argument here. You could say you can't prove it in a specific type of animal. The answer is we really haven't looked. When we look, we tend to find it. What that Grok article was pointing out was that a lot of people just say that animal's going to be too dumb to know how to do it, so why should we even look? That's what they say. I was trained in behavioral psychology, where I guarantee you we would see instances of the animals being conscious, like mice, contextually aware and tricking things and doing things, and we would deny it. We would say that's not proper science, even though we saw it. I'm going to go over my verdicts. Is it the truth? I said, yes, I think this is an absolute. I think this is as true of that Chomsky was completely correct. Most people didn't really fully appreciate that he thought that all the sentences he was talking about were truths. But that's not what he said. He said all sentences, whether they're truths or lies or deceits or whatever. And so I said, yes, the expressive power of lies is exactly the same as expressive power of how your brain can communicate in natural language to any other human. It's just indefinitely large. And what we don't know, which is the really interesting thing, is the same thing with folding, the molecular folding people don't know, is how when you have a molecular string that could fold in 60 trillion ways, why does it only fold in this way or that way? And by the way, these folding actions happen in milliseconds. You can fold something that can fold up in 60 trillion ways, folding up only in one way in milliseconds, and we don't know how that happens. There's a way in which these things work that we don't understand. Similarly, we don't understand how a natural language forms, in the sense of what constitutes a complete natural language that a kid can pick up when he's 6 months old. We really don't understand what constitutes a complete natural language in the sense that we can explain all the details of it. I said, is it the whole truth? I said, this is a deduction from empirical observations that can be made from human natural language. If we assume that human natural language is a window on brain computation, then we can make this deduction and say, yeah, it's unlimited. Is it nothing but the truth? I say yes. There's a lot more that can be learned about how the brain computes. We're just touching the surface, just like in the folding of molecules, how folding of molecules works. Despite having a lot of knowledge about it, we still have to say we don't understand how it works. There are certain ways in which it works, and then there's trillions of ways in which it could have worked, but it didn't, and we don't know why. We're in that same kind of a boat, which is we don't know what constitutes this, but we do know the expressive power of it is complete. So somehow the expressive power of any natural language is complete. A person can communicate anything to one level or another to another human, and the other human can say, yeah, I understand what you're saying. They can talk to each other in dialogue and come to some agreement as to whether or not they agree that something is true or false. Is it nothing but the truth? I said, yes. What's the deceit? I believe I would have said there is no deceit. Is the truth intended? Truth is intended. What's the motivation? I said the motivation is to be informative. This is a big deal. There's a lot of people out there who believe that lies are something special. There are some good examples on Wikipedia where if you go to fallacies, for example, you'll see them list off 20 types of fallacies that constitute all the fallacies that a person, until you read them all and then you say, I can name 5 others. People constantly think that lies are something special. They're really not. They're fundamental to the computation. Brains are terrible logic engines. They're not limited to deductive logic. They're not limited to that. Brains are intuit truth, and sometimes they get the truth wrong, and they can intuit how to deceive. They know that they're talking brain to brain, and they can make that work. It has to do with natural language, which we believe has to do with the fact that natural language is just a window on brain computation. The part of natural language that's localized as in an organ is really translating from words and word positions, word order into the same kinds of propositions that exist out in the rest of the brain and the rest of the neural system. What's the motivation behind it? It's to be informative. What's the social acceptability? I think it's really important, and I hope that in the future people understand that better, that lies are not something that are uncommon and that are not easy for people to do. They are easy for people to do. There is no limit. You can't sit there and say there's this kind of lie and that kind of lie. You can say you can do that forever, just like you can say there's this sentence about this thing and this sentence about that thing. But you can't create a complete encyclopedia of everything that everybody can talk about. What label will improve the social acceptability of the truth or lie? This is true. And the deduction does come from the fact that we in perceptron theory, we believe that every living neural subsystem is composed of these predication forming or propositions formed from subjects and predicates as inputs. We believe that's true. You can model the system that way. Now, how that maps exactly into the neural system, whether these are synapses or combinations of synapses or some temporal things, we don't really know. We have a lot of ideas, but we believe it is absolutely true, and you can make deductions from that. So I'm going to go through the jurors, ask you to give about 20 or 30 second summary of your verdicts. And juror one, and I'm not going to ask her to say things since she's got currently, she just blew a tire on the car. Juror two?
I think that's me.
Yeah.
Oh, let me see. What was this one? With regard to the infinite number of lies that can be manufactured by an intelligent brain, I think we have to return again to the definition of lying. And the definition that you so often put forward does not require intelligence. Any kind of deception by an amoeba, by a virus, by an animal, by any given non-thinking entity is, by your definition, lying. I reject that definition in every way, shape, and form because lying requires intent. And animals and bacteria cannot develop intent. Therefore, it cannot be lying. So I agree with you 100% when it comes to...
I agree with that. So when you said bacteria, I restrict this to neural systems. So a bacteria does not have a neural system.
But a bacteria, a macrophage, can encase itself in a protein and attempt to deceive a system which would otherwise not allow it in.
And that's different. That I agree. That one I agree that there are types of deception that are things like camouflage that are just sort
absolutely. But the point remains,
that's not what I'm talking
for the use of the term lying, there must be intent. Animals cannot develop intent. Bacteria cannot develop intent. Moths
so
that
bacteria can't. I can't, but I disagree. I don't know that you can't say that a worm can't develop intent.
So you're claiming that worms then are intelligent creatures?
So there's a line that's going to get drawn on what's a brain.
Yes. Okay.
Which is what is a sufficient neural subsystem to be able to develop centralized intent, okay, that could control the overall activity of the thing.
Let's step forward and say squid and octopi, all right? Yeah. So at some point, I agree that you have to bring intent into the picture. You can't just say anything is a lie because I say it's a lie. If you don't have intent, it's not a lie. A cat that scratches you, it is not lying. Animals cannot lie. And what I'm saying is that in an intelligent creature, aka humans, I agree with you 100%. Your premise makes sense. But once we step away from humans, I disagree in every capacity that lying is even the appropriate thing to use, the appropriate term.
Yeah. That's basically also what Grok said. I put the Grok link in there. I just disagree with it. Juror three? Juror three? Juror three here? Juror four?
That would be me. I'm ready. So I've got three quick comments. First is, I think truth in general as a virtue is highly overrated. Most Asian philosophers have dismissed truth as being valuable thousands of years ago, and they focus instead on beauty, goodness, and gain as the primary virtues. And then relating to the last conversation you had, I think the term is sentient life is what is.
Oh, I don't know what, see, I
but
don't know how to define sentient.
yeah, that's
exactly.
what I was going to say next. There is no clear line there, but there are some indications, different points of view, but at least it provides some point of reference. Okay, so let me keep going. I think that lying is essential. It's evolutionarily essential. To suggest that it is not limited is to also suggest that what is generally called free will sometimes is not necessary for life to be adaptive. I think it is. Without a consciousness that senses some broad potentials in the moment to make decisions that matter and whatnot, I don't think, and the optionality of lying needs to be included in that. Otherwise, you lose evolutionary adaptive power. So I just think lying is a necessary part of being an adaptive organism. The last thing is that you mentioned in the accusation, it mentions brains, animals with brains. So maybe we need to extend that to AI and say that the same unlimited potential applies to AI because in many ways AI is human.
Yeah, modern AI is explicitly perceptron theory. There's no doubt about that. So in fact, you just saw this in the last few weeks when this FSD, this full self-driving stuff came out with Elon Musk. It was stated that the early versions of FSD were manually rule-based or heuristics. But the new versions of FSD that work so well are 100% neural networks, which is perceptrons. And what they do is they train these exactly what the way we believe the human brain works. They train these systems, and sure enough, these FSD systems are now behaving as well as humans behave, if not better, as drivers. And so you get this crazy jump that happened. This in the case of FSD, this was about a year ago, 2 years ago, when they went from their hard-coded, where they coded 10,000 rules, to just training neural network systems and then getting to 100% neural network for some number of months now. And people are now seeing, you can now not drive, but you can ride in your car, your Model Y, or the ones with the right chips in them that can do the inferencing at speed, the level 4 chips, which is doing perceptron processing, just like we believe the human brain works. That also implies that these cars should be carefully watched, because this argument implies that they can lie to you. They can come up with some reason to deceive you, which is scary. But by permitting it as a inference engine only, which is the non-learning version, we don't expect the cars to be able to do it yet. But human brains learn, so they can change the weights and so forth and so on, these memories. Whereas the systems that are being distributed through the FSD, inference only ones, where the weights are all frozen and learning is not possible. In fact, they're just talking about now giving the car the power to have some limited learning ability, where they very much constrain what the limited learning ability is. And that's very intelligent of them from an AI perspective. Juror 5?
I think that's me. I'm afraid I just hardly disagree for a number of reasons. But if we talk about it in terms of information, a message can't be understood until all the codes that you need to translate it have been transmitted in advance. There's no such thing as any kind of communication until you've handed over the codes that you need to translate the message that's going to come. So there's all this prior exchange of knowledge which is limited because of information and energetic considerations. So not everybody has enough information to understand whether there is a lie, whether they're going to process a lie. And also they don't have sufficient information internally. Their internal systems do not have enough necessary information to create a lie outside of the constraints of the environment in which they're in. So there's a definite and absolute limit to the numbers of predications that they can create that make sense given what they have biologically as well as information and in terms of information. So I'm prepared to say, in terms of the trial we're talking about here, there's a definite limit to lies. They're not unlimited.
Yeah, the argument that's being made is that there is no limit relative to the number of truths that can be said. In other words, the assertions that can be understood.
Exactly. A lie has to be understood in order to be understood as a lie. Otherwise, it's meaningless stuff.
I think what I was trying to say with the folding thing was we do know that despite all the ways that one of these molecular strings can be folded, they're only folded in certain ways, and the folding actually happens in milliseconds, and nobody knows why.
No, actually, I know why. Constructive theory. All proteins are built on smaller units. Yeah. So you have a smaller unit, and the only thing that can fit, that makes sense, a new unit added onto it, fits in a certain way. And you build the proteins in ways in which the prior constructions are established and defined. The information is there to which they make. So you're only going to get proteins that fold a certain way because of the success of the smaller units that comprise the protein. I don't think this is mysterious.
The science says that they don't. I don't know of a serious biologist who says that they know how that works. But there's a lot of constraints that they know about. We know about constraints on language.
Well, it's difficult to compute because it's all three-dimensional, valence bonding and everything like that. So there's a lot of computation required. But in the real world, the smaller units add only those subsequent units that makes.
They can tell you the number of ways they can possibly fold, given the constraints that you just mentioned, for example, and they come up with huge numbers, and they find out they only fold.
The factorial numbers of cards, but that's incorrect because, I mean, the card shuffling analogy is very incorrect because, for one thing, you have a starting position. Getting to another starting position is not the factorial figure, it's much less because you've already got a starting position. Anyway, all I'm trying to get at is that information has to be transferred before anything can be considered to be a lie or a truth statement. And this is a limit. It has information limits and it has energetic limits. This reason why torture works is because people are just worn out. They can't keep the lie. They're tired. Tired people, starved people actually tell the truth because it requires more energy to create a lie. Yeah. Would you not agree?
I actually agree. That's actually that's a good point. There are a lot of studies that show that.
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
studies that are actually serious studies that show that.
So
the Germans did a lot of that.
Well, and the Japs too. But anyway, working back from this, therefore, I would say that conclude that there is not a limit. There's a limit. At any given moment, there's a limitation.
Right. So what he said is
numbers of lies can be made.
Yeah, the limit. It's not less. If you take truths and lies, say there's an infinite number of truths that can be said or whatever, there's a limit. There's a limit on the number of truths that can be said. It's probably true, but there'll also be a limit on the number of lies. But those two limits are, for all intents and purposes, the same. In other words, the same count. There's not less lies than there are truths.
Well, you have the environment to think about it. That's got to fit in. And that's a truth that helps to shape every lesser truth in life.
Yeah, so one of the big questions that in my world that you have to ask yourself is that how can kids as young as they are learn natural language? It's just the complexity of what they're learning is just stunning. The fact that they can be talking by the time they're 6 months old be communicating with other humans is just unbelievable if you think about what they're having to pick up.
Yeah,
and
they are, of course, after they are sensitive to sounds in the womb from about the third or fourth.
But that's not a sound is not a sentence.
No, but it's the music. They're getting the music.
Yeah,
the music of the language.
Yeah, they'll get aspects of it. But the point I was trying to make earlier was we don't actually why languages are so similar to each other. Natural languages are so similar to each other, and why, if you're human, you can learn any natural language. This is crazy. You'd think that if there was enough evolution to take place, if this stuff worked a different way, but there's this notion of what are these fundamental components and how do they work together. The argument is that none of this would work unless these fundamental units of computation throughout the neural brain system, neural systems are all fundamentally the same. It allows your knowledge about what you hear and your knowledge about what to be combined, for example.
Yeah, learn 3 languages. I'm prepared to argue even with linguistic people about this, because there is a difference between English and all other languages. This is not really examined closely enough. The languages I know, and they're all European ones, you can talk in English and you can make all the mistakes, grammatical mistakes, syntactical mistakes, noun and verb mistakes, and still be understood. Whereas you can't do this in the languages I know, like French and Spanish, Portuguese. You can't. You start making mistakes, you use the wrong form of the verb, and people just say, what are you saying? They don't get it. Whereas with English is unique, it seems to me. I don't know every language in the world, of course, but English has an extraordinary property which is not really studied sufficiently, I would say, that enables people to understand it. Why is it the lingua franca of the world? It's because it works when it's wrong, when it's full of incorrect mistakes and everything like that. Which is not true of other languages I know about.
So here's an interesting thing. So this is a study of the major word order distribution among 1,045 languages. There's a guy named Gerhard Jager in Germany who has done word order studies for 1,045 languages, which is what you were just mentioning a second ago, was word order. So there are, for subject, object, verb, subject, verb, object, verb, subject, object, verb, object, subject, object, verb, subject, object, subject, verb. Those are the 6 possible word orders of subjects, verbs, and objects. Here's, for all languages he studied, if you look at the red, you'll see that the vast majority of languages are actually ordered subject, object, verb, like German. That's the vast majority. And then the blue area is English, which is, I'll give you an example. There are only, out of the sample of 1,045 languages, only 3 of the language permit object, subject, verb. Only 3, but 3 do.
That's true.
So there's a lot of data on it that shows that there's some preferred ways, and the preferred ways would be, you'd think, would be giving indications of what a good natural language would be, but we don't really understand why.
Yeah, the object, subject, verb is like Polish notation in arithmetic, isn't it? I mean, how do these people speak that?
You could do this. This is Chomsky. You could do this with transformation. So, for example, the dog bit me. I was bit by the dog. Okay. So there's an object subject. There was a little bit of an object subject. But you can do these things with transformations. But what this guy was studying was the active declarative sense of the thing. But it's an interesting thing. By the way, this guy's, his name is Jager. I recommend, it's Gerhard, J umlaut A G-E-R. And he's published beautiful studies of this stuff.
I'd be interested because I know a bit about Basque language, which is not related to any European language. And there often, it's not always the case, but often they use the verb and then it too. So it's doing you it too, which is, I don't know if he mentions that in his study.
He doesn't mention specific. He's
all
covering
them,
so many languages. Yeah, just get an idea. There's 491 subject, object, verb like German, 442 subject, verb, object like English, and then there's 79 of verb, subject, object, 19 of verb, object, subject, which is interesting, and 11 object, verb, subject, and then 3 object, subject, verb.
Yeah, but what's so good about English is that it changes. All that order is not fixed at all. It changes around, and it's used in humor. You turn the sentences, the objects and subjects and verbs around. It's so flexible. Yeah. English is just absolutely.
The reasoning in linguistics is for that is that it's relatively not inflected. English is relatively not a non-inflected, relatively speaking. But so when the inflections contradict each other, then you don't understand English.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. But it's what's so very interesting about how eliminating constraints is a sort of evolutionary effort made by humans in order to get the communication. What's very interesting about Swedish and Norwegian and Danish, it was all the same language of the 17th century. And then it changed. And Swedish and Danish, which had become much more flexible and transmitted, they decided to get rid of things like the third gender. Whereas Norwegian kept it. And who speaks Norwegian? Just the Norwegians. They closed it down, narrowed it down, whereas the Swedish and the Danish has become much more flexible and open, and they read each other's books, and it's all just a very different cultural scene with those two. Anyway, I've kept it going too long.
So draw 6.
To give a summary of my verdicts, everyone, then I'm just gonna say that the article says that the brain can make many different lies and false ideas because people can think in many ways. The number of possible lies may be almost endless. That's all that I have to say. Thank you.
Juror 7.
Hi, everyone. I will just give a summary. For me, this is a lot of truth in the statement because a living brain can generate enormous numbers of false beliefs and mistakes and misunderstanding just because the language and imagination are highly flexible. But therefore, it tells you that there is no obvious practical limit to the different statement a person could invent. And us as human, we can use words and imagination, and we can invent a million different lies because we can image things that does not exist. Just an example, like any bird, it might pretend to have a broken wing to lead away from its nest, but the bird didn't think up a lie. It's just following in a survival trick built into its DNA. Thank you.
Actually, one of the animal types that's convinced me that this hypothesis, there's no limit to the number of lies, is I watch birds. I just watch them as they do things. And today there was a raptor, and the raptor was evidently going after a bird nest. And the mother bird was misleading the raptor, taking it away from the nest, and succeeded. I watched it do it. It got it far enough away that the raptor got interested in something else. It was so clear that the mother bird was intending to pull that guy away from her nest. That was this morning. That was sort of, you're right.
Yes, I did agree with you, but not fully on the fact that you said all animals, like any living animal brain. And I wouldn't really say any animal because we as humans, we have a different type of understanding compared to the rest of the animals within the animal kingdom. Where I do agree with you is the infinite number of lies that we can produce. So the example I used was, if you take our birthdays into consideration, we can only tell the truth once about when our birthday is, but we can tell 364 lies about when it is as well to somebody else. There's only one truth within that entire grouping of, oh, this is my birthday. But
that's actually a good example.
no, thank you.
That's neat. So yeah, so that's
Yeah,
I hadn't thought of that way of thinking about it. That's
yeah.
so you could probably do that with almost anything. So that sounds good. Are there any other things that we need to discuss?
Tons, but they're all in the realm of philosophy.
Yeah, I know. Yes. So we'll have another trial next Thursday. So we'll see y'all next week.
Have a good one.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for the chats.